everybody. This is Scott Schimmel, and this is the first time we've ever had a U-School podcast on video and on audio. So for those of you looking at my big giant face in this computer screen, hello. And my lovely guest today, who, if you've been listening and following the U-School podcast, this is we've had very few repeat guests, maybe 2 or 3. And so the fact that you're one of them is a very, I don't know what it means, but it's a big deal to me. Laura Spencer, why don't you just kind of give us an update of who you are, what you're doing in the world? How do you even categorize and explain what you do? Because you're an educator, but
I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm an educator right now doing some consulting work, but really just trying to connect with people and help them understand what learning is about in today's society. How can they transform learning? How can I support them through that work? How can I cheerlead for them? So I kind of look at myself as I don't want to say a jack of all trades, but just really getting out there and trying to make a difference. So connecting with the people who are doing the work and seeing how I can support that.
You've done a lot of work on innovation, design thinking, which is, I think, still very new in education. It's not necessarily new in the marketplace and in the business sector, but what is it? Is it accepted now? Just your perspective, is innovation and design, is that a mainstay? Is it here to stay?
I wouldn't go that far yet. I think there are more people that are trying to get on board. I think education is such a centuries old bureaucracy that it's hard to just bring that into school systems. There's so many things that need to change, but I think you have a lot of people that are trying to make a difference. So you'll see it interspersed, but you won't see it a lot as the way of things. But I think there's a lot of people who are trying to make the move. So you see a lot of things talked about as innovation. Design thinking is starting to make a place. It's trying to find its spot. Where does it fit in? I think is what people are trying to figure out, and they're trying to understand: is it project-based learning? Is it something you only do in a makerspace? Can it work in a core curriculum? So there's a lot of people trying to grapple with how does it work in education versus how we've seen it work in industry. So people trying to figure that out.
Where do you think it fits?
I actually think it fits everywhere, because I think you have to look at design thinking, first of all, as a mindset. If you can look at the world through empathy, it changes how you view things. So if you look at it that way, then I think design thinking goes everywhere. As a teacher looks at how they're going to teach a lesson, they can use design thinking to consider the student's needs, right? And how am I going to approach this from their lens, not mine? I saw a thing on Twitter today. A guy sent a tweet out saying, teachers, before you send letters home to parents, can you consider what parents are thinking? Don't come at them as, let me tell you how to do your job, but are you building community? That's design thinking, right? Are you using your empathy to make a difference? And then there's also the piece of, now I want my students to use it. So are they using it intentionally? Are they using it to just do a project and then be done with it? So there's a lot of different ways design thinking can be used. Yeah. And it's kind of weird, because I think the system has to change in order for design thinking to be really widely accepted. And yet it's going to take design thinking to help the system change so that it can be widely accepted. So chicken and the egg, which should come first? But it's just that interesting paradox right now of education needs design thinking. Yeah. And design thinking needs education. So how do we bring those two together? And so I've been working with some really cool teachers who are doing a lot of work, working with schools. I know we're going to talk about it, but working with peer counselors in different groups, and really just trying to figure out how can we really bring this to life in a meaningful way, not just have it be a project with a grade at the end.
Well, I think I'd call you like a Twitter star. You're a voice on Twitter, let's say.
Yes.
And I saw one of the things you did this summer was, I think you called it design thinking for happiness?
Yes. Right.
High school kids. So I was like, what is that? What do you mean by that? Because the birth of U-School is out of a design shop. And so, like you were saying, I like the way you say it. It's just the way you approach things. And a lot of times people are asking me about, from like the background of U-School, what's our credibility? Where did we get our PhD? Where did, and we didn't. I don't.
Right.
At least the core team. But everything we've done has been, how do you actually understand what kids are going through? And how do you ask questions to give space for that? So tell me about so it was Rancho Bernardo High School. Who called? What did they want? What did you do?
So one of the counselors from Rancho Bernardo knew a friend of a friend, right? How a lot of things happen today's networking. So she reached out and she said, look, we have about 70 amazing students that are going to spend 2 days at USD learning how to become peer counselors. right? So they're going to be leading the charge at their school site, really helping students move forward. She said, at first she said, we'd love to have you come in and maybe do a keynote and get the kids jazzed up about
Mm-hmm.
design thinking and the work you do. But then the more we talk, I said, how about we turn this into a workshop? The thing about it is they're fun to excite people and get energized. And I love doing them. But with high schoolers, I just felt like I really wanted to take them further than just saying, go out and be awesome and give them something tangible. So we switched it and did a morning workshop. And so the whole idea behind it is, if you're a peer counselor, your job is to help with conflict, to help students navigate high school, to handle peer relations, to handle stress, to handle anxiety, all the things that happen. But a lot of times we spend so much time with those students talking about, here's something you can do, or here's something you can say, but not really showing them how to do it, again, through the lens of the other person. So the design thinking for happiness was a pretty simple concept. Had all these students, broke them into groups, and they first really sat and talked about what brought themselves happiness. So we did some reflection activity. They did some jotting down on paper and such as to, when you feel like that pure bliss, right? Like Jason Silva, he talks about like the awe. And I actually showed him a Jason Silva video. When you have awe, what's happening in your life? And so they thought about that for a while. And then they interviewed each other. So really taking it deeper. Tell me about your experience. And we talked about interviewing. When you're interviewing to get information, it's kind of like an empathy interview. You're not saying, oh, yeah, let me tell you about what happened to me with that, right? It's all about listening. It's just about asking why. It's about encouraging. So really spent a lot of time with the interview process. They were interviewing each other. And then they decided as a group, what's one person in our group that we're going to design for their happiness? So I'm going to take myself out of the equation and I'm going to design for that student instead of myself. And then I just took them through that whole design thinking process, the brainstorming, the ideation, the prototyping. It's pipe cleaners and styrofoam and cardboard. I had a whole wall of just, here's all the junk I could find in my shed that you can design with. But what they learned was how different happiness is for somebody else. And they talked about that when they did the share out. We did feedback at the end and each group was sharing, is they realized this would have never been something I would have considered because it's not what I do. Right. So like for me, if you say, hey, Laura, what would make you happy this weekend? And I said, oh, I'd love to go off-roading this weekend. And you're just thinking like, I would never ever do that. So it was important for them to hear from each other and to design for that person. And then we brought it back to that conversation as peer counselors. What's the important work here? It's not what you think is the right solution. It's what is happening in front of you. We had a lot of conversations about that because I think especially at those ages, they hear these things like, well, if you're being bullied or you have anxiety, go talk to a trusted adult. And they actually, when I brought that up, they kind of giggled in the room because let's be real. How many 16-year-olds are going to walk up to a trusted adult and say, I'd like to talk to you about the anxiety in my life and the fact that this girl is bullying me, right? So we really had to have those conversations about how do you listen and take it from somebody else's perspective. And I told them, I said, look, if you had said to me, confront your bully, and they laughed, but I said, I would rather curl up in the fetal position and cry. I'm not confrontational like that.
I'd rather drop out of school.
Right. I probably would have. But if you got to know me and you realize that I love to write, and then you had said, well, would you like to write about what's going on? Now you're connecting with me and what I need, right? And not what you need. So it was 2 hours. I think it was transformational for them. Their projects were so amazing. One group even did a skit about a girl going to a concert and having this experience with her friends. And what they also learned was the missing pieces in people's lives. Because when you're designing for happiness, what you realize is like those moments aren't 24/7. And they're really not meant to be. I think you have to have non-happiness in order to appreciate happiness. But they also started to realize things like there's a lot of loneliness in high school, right? There is a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of cliquish behaviors that are fun for some, but absolutely terrifying and horrible for others. So it was pretty eye-opening. And in fact, the counselor at the end, she said, oh, I wish you could work with our staff on this. We need this too. And
absolutely.
And I was like, well, call me when you're ready. But I just think it's that type of work that we don't get time to do. We're always rushed.
Right. I think mentioning the staff, we get to do some work with principals and admin teams, cabinets. And I think more of a recent thought for me, because of design thinking, is I just see an assumption that you all think you know your students, because a lot of them come into your office. You hear about problems with students, you hear about the problems at home with a small percentage of the students on your campus. And I guess my design thinking lens is you actually don't know your students at all unless
Right.
you are a student and go to class and sit with them and are on the snaps with them. You actually don't. There's no way you could get to know them. And so, what you're describing is a process to close that gap. I've been calling it immersion, like cultural immersion.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
another run study abroad. Like we're
Right.
going there not to bring
Mhm.
our values or our perspective. We're going there to immerse ourselves, understand their value.
Right.
I think of 21 Jump Street, and remember back in the day, like
Yes.
these
Right.
adults going back into high school life.
Mhm.
Um, because if you're in charge of policy, programs, curriculum instruction, parking lot security, like, and you don't know them, what are the odds that you're going to design things for them that are a miss? And I would say 100% chance.
Well, yeah, and I think too. I think back in just my days in schools and such, and doing things like focus groups. Oh, let's bring some students together and let's have a focus group. And I think, well, first of all,
Hmm.
so you've already made some determinations just based on having a focus group. So you now have kids who feel confident. You
Yeah.
have kids who are talkers. You have kids who have maybe been selected because they get along well with teachers, right? So you've already
ASB
kind of
kids,
isolated
involved,
out,
high achieving.
right? I remember sitting with an ASB group with him and thinking, like, this is not representative
Right.
of the student
Right.
body. And so trying to understand. So you talk about immersion. I do a lot with empathy mapping. Just being able to sit back and say, if you're listening to a conversation by somebody, yes, what they say is important, but it's also important to look at what they're doing. What, and then we talked about this with the high schoolers. Are they talking a lot with their hands? Do they seem jittery? Are they diverting their eyes because they don't want to look at you? Like, those are all important things to note. Also, what might they be feeling? There's certain usually words that kind of give you those clues, right? Oh, this is anxiety driven, or are they feeling happy right now? What are they thinking? So when you look again, instead of just taking the face value of, well, she said she was mad at me. Okay, well, let's dig into that a little bit more and really what's going on. It could be something completely different.
Yeah.
I think is important to do. My daughter's school does this cool thing every year. It's called Shadow Your Student Day.
Oh, okay.
And so they're very nice in that they make it a minimum day. They told parents you actually had to attend from 7 to 2 or 8 to 3, and parents would say you're crazy.
Yeah.
So I just follow my daughter to all of her classes for the day. It's cool because it's an opportunity for parents to, I think, connect and remember what high school is like.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, it's high anxiety day. Like I joke with
Yes.
my daughter. I'm like, I do not want to go back to high school. Like, I dreaded high school. I
Right.
just did not have great experiences. And now you're making me go back for a day. So that's a nice connection with her, for her to kind of laugh and say, it's okay, mom. Or for me to say, I need my coffee. And she says, we can't have coffee, during class. I'm like,
Right.
what do you mean you can't have
Totally.
coffee during class? But yet on the flip side, it's also very painful because one, high schools for the most part haven't changed, and that's not a slight on any of her teachers. It's just the system of what it is, right? But the other thing I think that where they're missing the mark is a lot of teachers kind of amp it up. Oh, parents are here today. We're going to play a game, or I built this lesson to engage the parents.
Right.
And really, honestly, I just want you to do what you do.
Yeah.
Like, don't stop your normal day because I'm in the room.
Right.
Do what you do, because I think that would give me a better understanding of what my daughter's going through.
Right.
But if I go and say, well, I don't understand why you're so stressed out about biology.
Totally.
That lab was really cool today. Like,
why you're disengaged and don't care, because she was great. She was really excited.
Exactly. And so I don't know how to. I think teachers, of course, are afraid. They want to make a good impression.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher too. I probably would do the same thing, right? Like when principal, you give your best lesson possible, right? You dust off. You're like, here it is.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of building empathy and really, like, going back to your question, understanding each other, just do what you do and let me understand now what's happening, right? And I can better help my child as she's stressed out through these days, she's trying to get into college, trying to have a life, trying to play sports and work a job and do her thing. And so that would help me better, I think. But they're trying.
I, I'm so glad you said that because my wife and I went to back to school night for our son's middle school the other night.
Hmm.
For some reason, I've never been able to go to a back to school night for all of our kids. I've always had work in. So this is my first one. And the way they designed it was we went to every single one of his class periods. So my wife and I were walking and we were in this like, the passing period. And I knew a bunch of the parents, kind of some of them, but my wife said, "Hey, I'm going to use the restroom for a minute." And I'm like, "Well, what am I going to do? Just stand here?" She's like, "Yeah." And I stood there and all I wanted to do was pull out my phone
Hmm.
so that I could hide. But I actually saw one of my son's buddies and we've carpooled with him. Literally I waved at him and he didn't recognize me or didn't see me. And he turned away. And all of a sudden I'm waving at somebody that's not waving back. And my wife came back and I'm like, we got to get out of here. Like this is bringing up all the memories. But
Right.
it was so helpful to your point to go home and think about my son, who I see him at night when he's maybe grumpy or tired or had a
Hmm.
stressful day. And honestly, I came back and I was like, buddy, I love you. You're such a champ. I can't believe you do this all day. Like that's
Right.
so stressful on so many levels. And he doesn't have the tools yet or the self-awareness yet to realize when he waves at a friend and they don't wave back, what actually just happened to him on the inside.
Right. Right.
He has to live the rest of the day like that, not knowing. I mean, it's just so. How do we? And this is Micah, you and me talking. How do
Right.
we? How do we get school leaders, principals, AP? How do we superintendents like? How do we get them to do that work? I mean, it's not. It's not hard. It's not hard to immerse yourself in student culture for a day or two. It's not hard to find students who wouldn't normally come to a focus group and take
Hmm.
them out to lunch. Like you can do that, but
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that?
I think, it's funny. It's not the actual action is not hard, but what's hard is making the time and seeing like the importance of doing it.
Yeah.
So in terms of like how do we do it? That's where I struggle because I think once you do it, you're going to know it's a game changer, right? I
Right.
think once you go out there and have those experiences, you'll never go back.
Hmm.
I don't know how to do that. It's like the gift of time, right?
Hmm.
The permission. How many times I work with teachers and they'll say, "Well, do I have permission to do that?
Hmm.
Is it best for kids? Then you
Hmm.
have permission to do it." Like
Yeah.
it's weird, and I'm realizing it's all the way up. Like I think even
Hmm.
superintendents, they report to the board. They have all the people that work in their
Yeah.
office, and if they were to I'm gonna just go down the street and have lunch with a couple of kids, they'd be like, "Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, your schedule is packed." So
Hmm.
um, I think building that why is
Yeah.
important. And again, that's where design thinking can fit so well, right? Because
Hmm.
that's again the empathy and the defining piece of we need to remember who we work for
Hmm.
and then and we work for the students and we work for their parents. And
Hmm.
so then how do we meet their needs? It's even back to school night. I was talking to a friend the other night
Yeah.
at a district. Her back to school night starts at 5:15. How
Hmm.
many parents do you think are there at 5:15?
Right. Yeah.
And they do that because it's more convenient to teachers. They can get out earlier and they can all go
Sure.
home, right? But it's not convenient. So
Right.
how do
Right.
we bridge that? I think we keep telling these stories.
Yeah.
And he's kind of one of my idols and my mentor. There's a superintendent in Wisconsin. His name is Joe Sanfilippo.
Hmm.
And he keynotes and he talks and you can find him, of course on Twitter, which is
Hmm.
where I met him. And one of the things he said to me is he said, we might not be the most innovative district out there. He
Hmm.
said, our stories are out there. That's his
Hmm.
mission. Mission is storytelling. He
Wow.
gets stories out there every day about Fall Creek. And I think even
Hmm.
Obama one time was like a Go Crickets or something. Like their story is
Hmm.
out there because that's what he's committed to doing, like
Yeah.
getting out the good word about
Right.
school. And so maybe it's just that. Maybe it's like you
Hmm.
and I and the ones who are doing it, like
Hmm.
amplifying those voices that are getting the word out and saying, what story could you tell today?
Yeah.
If I told every principal and every superintendent every single day, you
Yeah.
need to tell a good story, how are you going to get it if you're in your office?
Totally. Yeah.
Right?
And stories change culture, cement
Yes.
culture,
Right.
celebrate the right things. I
Mhm.
totally agree.
Right. And then and when you start to really tell the stories and you start to listen, because in the beginning, it's probably, oh, I took a picture and these kids were building a robot. But then when
Sure.
you start digging into that a little bit more and you connect with that student and you
Yeah.
realize like this is a game changer for that child.
Right.
Now we're having different conversations. Now
Right.
maybe the robotics club is even getting funded more because you're in there and you're making those connections and understanding what a game changer that is for students.
Yeah. Wow. Okay,
Just
I'm going to switch gears. That's just a thought. Just a thought. Bye, Laura Spencer.